Hey, what's up? How's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm gonna be doing my November wrap-up, which, to be honest, November has been kind of a strange month because I only read 10 books in the month of November, which, is quite a bit low for me if we're being honest. I mean, in October I read 22 books, so 10 books seems pretty low. And not to mention the fact that 80% of the books that I read this month were before Taylor Swift dropped the album Red. And since she's dropped Red, it appears that that album has broken my brain because I've only read 2 books since in the last 2.5 or 3 weeks. So yeah, things aren't looking so hot for me now, but let me tell you about the 10 books that I did read this month. And now that November is coming to an end, it's pretty much holiday season. Like, primetime Christmas shopping is happening right now as we speak. And thanks to today's sponsor, which is Top Cash Back, you can earn cash back on different websites when you spend money. Which, who doesn't love that? It's so simple and so easy to use Top Cashback. You just go to their website, you create a profile, which is completely free to sign up, and then from there you can start browsing a bunch of different places where you might shop from. They have this bar at the top that you can scroll through to see all the different things that they have, like airlines, car rentals, hotels, bed and bath products, tech products, fashion, beauty. Like, there's seriously something here for everyone. They even have a browser extension that you can also download, which is really easy to set up. You just add it to your Chrome extension. And the most exciting thing is that they do have a few different bookish websites that are available to shop through Top Cashback, like thriftbooks.com, Book of the Month, and Chronicle Books. I was able to shop through thriftbooks.com, and I used the Top Cashback website to go to their website and shop through them. And with thriftbooks.com, you save 3% cash back on all purchases. And so last night I went in there and I spent $28 on thriftbooks.com. And with my 3% cash back, this morning I got a notification that said I had 56 cents in my account, which I know 56 cents does not seem like a lot, but with how much I buy books, that's gonna start adding up pretty quickly, And it's still money back, whether it's big or small. Money back is a cool thing. But there's so many different items on this website that can give you as much as up to 10% cash back. So if you were to spend $10 on that item, you would get $1 back, which is really good. They have over 4,000 retailers on topcashback.com, and they offer 100% of commission back to their members. Because of this, they consistently feature higher rates than their competitors. There's a $10 sign-up bonus when you spend your first $25 on topcashback.com. So yeah, you can start saving money today and start getting some cash back. Use the link in my description to download Top Cashback. And thank you so much once again to Top Cashback for sponsoring today's video. On to the wrap up. As I said, 8 of the books that I read in the first 12 days of November. And just to make things even more funny, 9 out of the 10 books that I read this month I had the audiobook for, because as I've previously mentioned, I'm getting a little bit too distracted if I don't have the audiobook to help me get through the book lately. And that still remains to be the case. But out of the genres I read this month, I had 3 romance books this month, 1 young adult book, 2 thrillers, 2 horrors, and 2 just general fiction books. And then as far as ratings go, I actually had a pretty good month ratings-wise. The quality was up, which is good, because I had 9 4-star books and 1 3-star. So I mean, there was 9 4-stars, and there were some that were closer to a 4.5, maybe pushing up a little bit, but I didn't end up rounding up any of them to 5 stars because none of them felt like 5-star books to me. A lot of 4 stars, a lot of really great reads this month. I also did want to mention that I started reading Grave Reservations, but I only got about 80 pages into this because I was able to get my hands on the audiobook, but I really wasn't a fan of this audiobook because, long story short, I actually tried to read this book physically when I first got it, and then I was like, no, I'll wait for the audiobook to help me through it because, as I said, my brain lately, it can't focus. And then when I did try to listen to the audiobook, I was not a fan of the way that this narrator was narrating the detective in this story, because you see, when I was reading this book in my head, I was picturing more Ryan Gosling from The Nice Guys kind of detective, and I really liked that vibe. But this was more old school Agatha Christie, the detective's 80 years old maybe kind of vibe. And I just wasn't a fan of this in the audiobook. She just narrated him to sound super, super old, even though I think he has a teenage daughter, I'm pretty sure, which is why I was going for the Nice Guys Ryan Gosling vibe. But I still do want to read this book. It's through no fault of the book. I still do want to read it, but I don't think I'm going to be using the audiobook for my reading experience with this one. But the first book that I did finish this month was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. And this book is such a fun romance book. I actually did a romance reading vlog at the start of this month, like very first week of November. And this book was included in that reading vlog, so you probably might already know a lot of my thoughts on this. I adored this book so much. I think the hype is so real, you know, because this one's getting hyped, like insane, like so much hype. But I think it's totally deserving of the hype because this book is just so cute, it's so soft, and it's so much fun. Because we're following these two characters who are both scientists, which by the way, that's really cool. And I really like want more of that in romance books, you know. She's actually a student and he's actually a professor, so we almost got this like student-teacher thing going on, but it's not that explicit because, you know, the age gap isn't too crazy. We also have one of my favorite tropes happening in this book because it's fake dating. I freaking love a good fake relationship in a book. It's one of my favorite romance tropes to read about, and so I especially loved that in this. And like, yes, while this book was a little bit cheesy at times, I mean, it wasn't a perfect like 5-star romance for me, but I just genuinely adored these characters so hard, and I really loved the writing of this. The writing was just so fun and lighthearted, but it also had some really good conversations towards the end about, you know, women working in science. Like, you know, it was a really good time all around, and Olive and Adam are definitely characters that are going to be sticking in my brain. Like, I just really enjoyed them both as characters. So yeah, this one was a 4-star book for me. I thought it was so cute. The second book I read this month was Aristotle and Dante Dive into the Waters of the World. This was the only young adult book that I read this month, but this is one that I was absolutely so hyped for because the first book, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, is one of my favorite books of all time. Like, that's a book that I've reread I think 3 times now, and so I was highly anticipating this sequel. And this book just kind of picks up, you know, where the last story left off for the most part. Like, we're just following Aristotle and Dante as they navigate high school still. They're still in high school in this one. And this book is double the size of the first Aristotle and Dante. Like, this one's over 500 pages, which is, you know, part of the reason I think why I ended up giving this one 4 stars instead of 5 stars. I just think it was a little bit too long. Like, I don't think there's ever any reason why a contemporary story needs to be more than 500 pages or even 400 pages. I loved that this one seemed to dive into even more of the like social issues that were happening in Texas in the 1980s, you know, because I feel like the first book was more just like lighthearted and adorable, you know, soft romance vibes. But then this one, it really does dive more into like how the AIDS pandemic was happening in the 80s and how their families had to deal with society not accepting gay people at that time and how that was hard for them and for their families. Like, there was just a lot more discussion in this book about what it was actually like to be gay in 1980s Texas. I think it's really fun that Lin-Manuel Miranda actually narrates these audiobooks. He comes back and he narrates again for this one, and I just love the way he narrates these characters. Like, I will admit, he narrates Dante a little bit younger sounding than I picture Dante in my head. Aristotle is like one of my most relatable characters, and that continues in this book. Like, he just has a lot of really relatable moments and relatable thoughts and dialogue, and I just love his character. So yeah, this one was a 4-star book for me. I didn't love it as like quite as much as I have a burning passionate love for the first book, but I still appreciate this sequel, and I loved getting to see more of their lives after the first book, you know, it's exciting. All right, and then the third book that I read was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, and this is the third and final book that I read for that romance reading vlog that I did. And this one is an ARC copy. This one actually goes on sale on January 18th, which is my birthday, which is why I did that. This book, holy shit, this book was a lot. Colleen Hoover is really great at writing characters that you feel like they can't redeem themselves, you know, and then they do somehow. Because this book was tough, you know, it's a tough book to read, it's a tough book to root for the main character, and it gives you a whole lot of feelings, you know? Because in this book, we're following this woman named Kenna who is recently getting out of prison after 5 years, and she's going back to the small town where she was originally from because she wants to be there for her daughter. And then we also follow this guy named Ledger in this book. He works at a bar in the town. He's like the local bartender dude. And then they kind of cross paths and we kind of get to know how they know each other. And I don't want to tell you you any more than that because you should go into this book knowing nothing. But wow, I mean, as I said, this book is heavy. It will make you cry most likely. I mean, Colleen Hoover books will always make me cry. Like, she's just a very good, you know, emotional writer. And this book is no different. You know, this book was a really heavy one. It's really sad and depressing. And I went through so many moments in this book where I wasn't even sure if I liked the main character or not. It was just, you know, it was a tough one. But by the end of this book, I was like bawling my eyes out with sympathy. You know, it's one of those things that's like, ugh. So yeah, it's a tough one. I gave it 4 stars because even though I did end up bawling my eyes out over this book, there were still some things that I just didn't absolutely love about it. Like, it's not a new all-time favorite Colleen Hoover for me, but it's still like a 4-star book because it was really good. I'm gonna remember these characters. I'm gonna remember what happened. And then I also listened to the audiobook for Black Girls Must Die Exhausted. And this one, I'm like so happy that I ended up enjoying this book as much as I did because this is a debut novel from an author, so I wasn't too sure what I was getting myself into with like the writing, but this writing just really spoke to me. Like, I just immediately connected and like related to the main character and I just loved her. I also love the fact that this main character is a TV news reporter. Like, so freaking cool. You know, after I read this book, I was asking you guys for like more recommendations for books that have like a TV news reporter job because that is one of my favorite things. It's not even that big of a part of the story, but I was really intrigued by that. And also, like, this book is kind of it's almost like a slice of life. Like, we just get to kind of see what's been going on in this woman's life. And sometimes slice of life books just really don't do it for me. Like, sometimes I can find them to be really boring, but in this case, I just really loved it. Like, this author just has such a great writing style. She has really great characters, and I was just really invested in. I cared a whole lot about what was happening with this main character. And she does have a lot of great commentary on how challenging it can be to be a Black woman in society in these times. There's just a whole lot of great conversations happening in this book, and I just really appreciated it. And I'm happy to find out that this is actually going to be like the first book in a series. I think the second book is coming out next year, which I'm really excited about. I'm going to check out anything that this author writes because I really enjoy her writing style. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. And then the next book that I read this month, I actually listened to on audio again, and it was Come Closer by Sarah Gran. And unfortunately, this one ended up being my only 3-star of the month. Not that that's like a bad rating at all, but this is probably the book I enjoyed the least this month because I feel like this one had a really cool premise, and this one was actually recommended to me quite a bit when I was reading your horror recommendations. So I was hearing a lot about this book out of nowhere, and so I just got really excited for it. And this book's actually like a novella, or it's a short one. That, like, the audiobook's only like 4 hours long. This book had a super interesting premise, you know, because it's about how this woman starts to get this like voice in her head that's like making her do things that she wouldn't normally do, and just like strange things are happening to her and around her. And I just think while the premise was really interesting and it had a lot of potential, like, the execution of it wasn't my favorite, and I just wanted it to be a little bit more creepy and weird than it was. Like, I just feel like it never really got there for me. Like, I get what the author was trying to do with this book, and while I do think there were some like really unsettling moments that were really well done, I just kind of wanted it to like up the scariness, you know? I just wanted it to really get there, and it just never really got there. Like, so I ended up feeling kind of meh about this one. It's a 3-star book. And then I read And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. Like, I finally got around to reading this because I've had this on my TBR for years. Yeah, I finally read an Agatha Christie, you know, the Queen of Mystery. It happened. And I've got to say, I'm super impressed by this book because usually when it comes to reading classics, especially the classics that come from like the 1940s, like this book, I usually just don't vibe with the writing style. And so because of that, I ended up getting the audiobook to like help me get through the writing style, you know, because it is really like old-timey writing. And the audiobook was actually really helpful because I liked the way that the dude was like narrating it. He was like narrating it like it was like an old school movie. I immediately got sucked into it because of that. But this concept is just so interesting, you know, and so ahead of its time because we have these 10 strangers in this book, and they just get lured to this like mysterious mansion on this island that's like super isolated. And then while they're there, the first night at dinner, this like message gets broadcast over the speakers that's like accusing them of all of these things, and like their guilty secrets get exposed to each other. And then after that night, one by one, they start dying, and it's like, holy shit, there's a murderer among us. Who is it? And it's just like a classic whodunit story, you know? This was probably like the OG. And I can see how this book probably inspired so many different books and movies that I love today. Like, I could definitely see a lot of inspiration that came from this. And this was just so good. It was actually so much fun. It was kind of like a cozy mystery vibe, which I really liked. I also had two different theories going throughout this book for what I thought was happening, and I was completely wrong, which I love that. I love being wrong about a mystery. It's just so exciting. So yeah, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Like, I ended up really enjoying this, which really surprised me because I wasn't sure if it was going to be my thing or not. And then another book that I knocked out that has been on my TBR for literally forever is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this is another one that I was nervous that it might not be my thing. I actually tried reading this book a few years ago and I only got 50 pages in, but this time I had the audiobook and it helped me push through some of the slower parts at the beginning, and oh my god, it was so good. And this book is one that might be a little like to read during the pandemic, you know, because if you didn't know, this book actually follows this world where there's this, you know, flu-like pandemic happening, this flu-like virus, and it ends up being a post-apocalyptic story because of how bad things get. But this story is really interesting compared to some other pandemic books that I've read because I really love the way that this book jumps around with time. Because right at the start of this book, you know, we see the beginning of the pandemic, like as it's happening, and it's like really scary and really intense and, you know, really relatable. So the first 50 pages are pretty intense, and then immediately we jump into part 2, which sends us 20 years into the future. So we're like experiencing this post-apocalyptic world. Like, what does the world look like 20 years after this pandemic? And then we also do get parts in this book where we jump back in time so we can see what was going on, you know, like a year or even 5 years, I think, before the pandemic actually started. So I really loved the way that this book jumped around in time because I feel like my issue with a lot of pandemic books is that the pandemic is only mentioned at the beginning of it, and then for the rest of the book you're just like bored because it's like about them surviving, you know? But I loved getting to know the characters through flashbacks, and I do think this book has a lot of really strong characters and just really gorgeous writing in general. Like, this is the kind of book that will make you think a lot about the world and about humanity and like how we treat people and just so many different things like that. I just really loved this. I also really loved the idea of Station 11, which I don't want to mention too much about because I think it might be a spoiler, but yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I give it 4 stars. Then I was finally able to get to When the Reckoning Comes. This is a horror novel that I've been so freaking hyped about because ever since I saw my friend Mina mention this book on Instagram, I was like, okay, what is that? I'm so intrigued. And in this book, we're following this woman named Mira, who she grew up in this small town in the South, and she's a black woman, but she had this white woman, Celine, that was like her best friend, and then she was also really close with this black boy named Jesse, and the 3 of them were like super tight growing up, and she ended up leaving the small town, and now she's coming back to the small town because her white friend Celine is getting married. But the thing is that her friend Celine is getting married on this plantation that they've completely converted into this like vacation resort. It's just super weird, you know, because this resort, they do all these like reenactments at the plantation of like things that used to happen there, and it's really creepy because all of the actors and the staff is black at this place and all of the audience watching is white, and Mira is like the only, you know, black person there watching this being like, what the fuck? And it's just really creepy. You know, I think this book has one of the best like creepy atmospheres. Like, the vibe is just so unsettling and uncomfortable for most of this book, and I just really loved the writing. Like, I was immediately on board with the writing. And this is a debut book too, so like I'm just super impressed by this one. And I seem to have the opposite opinion of a lot of people because a lot of, you know, reviews that I read said that they thought the first 80% was so boring and slow, and then the last 20% was good when the action started to pick up. But I actually have the opposite opinion because I really enjoyed the first 80%, like the slow burn. I just immediately loved the characters, loved the writing, and I thought it was so like perfectly unsettling and creepy without being like too in your face about it. But then I feel like the last 20% for me was just kind of like, once the action really started to pick up, I just lost a little like tad bit of interest. So I don't know, I ended up giving this one 4 stars though, and this one's definitely like a standout horror book in my mind. Like, this is not going to be one that I'm forgetting anytime soon. And then I did read this month's book troop selection, False Witness by Karen Slaughter. Me and my friend Haley actually just did a whole live show discussing this book. And this one, you know, it might just be my favorite book troop pick of this year. This one, in, you know, typical Karen Slaughter fashion, we follow these two sisters in this book, and this book starts with a bang. Oh my god, the first opening scene in this book is like so intense. But something that I really enjoyed about this book is that we're following this woman named Lee, who's a defense attorney, and she gets assigned a case for this man that like may or may not be involved in her past. It's just very interesting. I also think something that's very strange about this book is that it takes place during COVID times, so that was definitely unique and very interesting to read in a thriller book again. And I don't know, even though this book had some of my like least favorite tropes in thrillers, I still really loved this book because of the sister relationship and because it's just so well written. Yeah, I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't like an all-time favorite of mine, but I really enjoyed my time reading this one. And the last book that I read this month was The Royals Next Door. This is a romance novel that I've been highly anticipating, and my hold on the audiobook finally came through, so I was like, why not? Let's go. And this one is so cute because it follows this woman named Piper, who's an elementary school teacher, but she's also a romance podcaster on the side, which, you know, I love when podcasts are mentioned in books. Like, I just love it. This story is interesting because it does involve like a royal couple, but the thing is that the royal couple is going to be moving into the house that's like next door to her, and this is a romance between her and their like bodyguard or their like security dude. So I thought that was like a very unique thing to read about. Like, I just really enjoyed their romance. It was very like, you know, slow burn, and like they had really good banter. And I also, surprisingly, I really loved the conversation about enjoying romance books and like the shame and the stigma around romance books in this book. There was actually a lot of really great conversation about that, and about how teachers have to keep this like perfect, you know, reputation in the eye of the public because they're a teacher, and how, you know, they're expected to be role models for their young students at all times in their lives. I don't know, like the discussion about that and how it can be so hard and like difficult sometimes to be a teacher when you're expected to like held to these high standards at all times. And yeah, the whole stigma about romance, it was just a really great conversation in this book. And yeah, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Like, I will admit, the romance, it got a little bit like cheesy at some parts, which is why I ended up giving it 4 as opposed to like 5 stars. But I still really enjoyed this. I thought it was a really cute book with some really great conversation about romance books. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read this month. You know, as I said, 10 books. It's not a lot of books for me. Like, I was just having a really busy and chaotic month, and, you know, with Taylor Swift dropping Red, it did not help my head, you know, because I literally, like, it always is the case where if Taylor Swift drops a new album, I immediately get into a reading slump because I just want to listen to the new album, like, nonstop, so I'm not listening to audiobooks, I'm not reading, I'm not doing anything. But this time it just hit especially hard for me, and I don't know if that's because the 10-minute All Too Well was on that, which is like my new obsession, like my favorite thing ever. So that really took up a lot of brain space for me this month, apparently. But I think I'm back on the swing of things, you know. I think December, I think it's gonna go fine. But yeah, let me know, how many books did you read in the month of November? What was the best book that you read in the month of November? And what are you looking forward to reading in December? My December TBR, it is coming. Don't you worry, I have one in the works, but it's gonna be a little late. Just wanted to warn you. And yeah, don't forget that you can get a $10 sign-up bonus when you spend your first $25 on topcashback.com. And thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. And I will see you very soon with another video. Bye.